Well, I work at Americhem. It's a plastics company. It makes colorants for the plastics industry. I'm the technical service specialist there. It's one job that most other people in the plant would say they would never want, but I love it. I field problems. I take care of failures that occur with our products, with customers, processing issues, performance issues. And part of my job is I have to identify and define the problem and then come up with a corrective action. In one sense, when I'm identifying and defining the problem, I'm looking for what they call a root cause analysis. I want to get to the one simple, single thing that has caused the failure to happen so that I can define it and then address it and strike it at the root to correct it. It's what I do at work. And almost always, when I do a root cause analysis of something, it falls to either one of three things. The most common is somebody in our plant made something without following the proper procedure. Sometimes there wasn't a procedure to be followed. And then other times we just have the wrong technology. And I thought to myself a couple weeks ago, I said, I wonder if I could do a root cause analysis of sin. What actually made this happen in the garden? What about a root cause analysis? Maybe if I could find that one root cause, something that I could define, and maybe that would explain why some people become addicted to pornography. It could explain maybe why some people, when it comes to alcohol, they can't say no. Something that would explain why some people are more prone to depression and sadness than others. What makes them sad? What makes them so depressed? An answer as to what makes an incredibly good marriage go bad. What's the root cause analysis? Sometimes just, why are people sad? Why do I get sad? And I wondered, could a root cause analysis end up saying that the root cause of a lot of the problems and a lot of the sins that we face really comes down to loneliness? That's why this morning we're going to use the Bible to perform a root cause analysis of sin, which will identify, define, and then come up with a corrective action to address the problem of loneliness. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I would be surprised if I'd say, who here has never been lonely? I would be surprised. Oh, then we do have one hand that went up. I have never been lonely in my life. Well, I would just go to the book of Proverbs and read there, and you can tune me out. But most people deal with loneliness. Some people are almost destroyed by it. Do you know half the love songs that are written all deal with loneliness? Hank Williams wrote a real famous song about loneliness. I hear that lonesome whippoorwill, he sounds too blue to fly. The moon just went behind the clouds to hide himself and cry. And he keeps saying through the song, I'm so lonesome, I could cry. Oh, popular song if you're into country and western music. Even if you're not, I guarantee the modern music of the day is about loneliness. It's about the emptiness of the heart. You know, now I enjoy being alone. I enjoy it. And I have a good marriage. I have 3 very active children, but I enjoy my time alone. Yet, sometimes I struggle with loneliness. And I say to myself, where is this coming from? My life is full. I don't have a moment to rest, it seems. So how could I be lonely? Where is this coming from? So let's start off by, number 1, identifying the problem. How did loneliness start? How did it come into being? Let's identify the problem. And I think loneliness came into being even in the Garden of Eden. I think it started even with Adam. Do you know when God created everything, everything was good? Genesis 1:3, and God created light, and God said it was good. Genesis 1:10, God created land. He looked at it and he says, it is good. Genesis 1:12, God created all the vegetation, all the trees, all the plants. And he says, it is good. Genesis 1:18, God created the sun, moon, and the stars. He looked at it and said, it is good. Genesis 1:21, God creates the fish and the birds and all the teeming things in the seas. And he looks at it and he says, this is good. Genesis 1:25, he creates all the animals that are upon the earth. He looks at it and he says, this is good. Genesis 1:31, God creates man. And then he takes a sweeping look at everything he's made and he says, it's very good. Wow. No flaws in the Garden of Eden. And so in Genesis 2:15, God says he put man into the garden to work the garden, to tend the garden. This is where man's food was going to come from. God is meeting Adam's needs in the garden. And then in Genesis 2:18, the first negative thing that's ever said in the Bible is said. God says, do you know what's not good? It's not good that he's alone. Now, why would God say that? Because God would come in the cool of the day to walk with Adam. Why would God say, it's not good for him to be alone? This is before the fall. This is before sin came in, and God said, not good. Now, before anything was created, all that was God. The fullness, the goodness, the holiness of God. But at the very moment of creation, the very fact that he created light means that creates the possibility for darkness. When he created Satan, let's say Lucifer, and he was created, it says in Ezekiel 28, perfect in beauty, perfect in every way, as a created being, and as a finite being, that means that for Lucifer, there was also the possibility, the potential of evil. So when he created man, creation was good, but along with creation came the fact that I'm alone. I'm alone, Adam would say to himself. And at this point in Genesis 2:20, God made a helper for man. A helper. God was there to meet his needs and Eve's needs, and they were to be helpers to each other. There was aloneness with Adam and Eve, both before the fall. Man needed two relationships in Eden for loneliness to be addressed. A relationship with God who set the rules. This is right, this is wrong. These are the parameters in which you can function. Of this you can eat, and of this tree you cannot. This is how I want you to live. These are the boundaries within which I want you to live. And then he gave Adam and Eve each other as helpers. Now, you have each other. You can touch each other's needs. Because you know what? I'm going to be there in the cool of the day to walk with you, but not every moment, all the time. This will be somebody there to keep you company, to help you, to augment the relationship. You can talk to this person. They can touch your needs. There can be companionship. So if their needs were met, if God was there to meet their needs, and they had helpers to touch each other's needs, why did they choose to disobey? What brought this about? Now it says that Eve was totally deceived by the serpent, and then she brought the fruit to Adam. Now Adam knew better. He was told, no. He was the one that had the direct instruction from God. If you eat of this, in that day you shall surely die. So Adam had a choice. He sat there looking at the fruit, looking at Eve. She had already eaten. And I wonder if Adam thought to himself, this is my companion. This is my helper. She's eaten of this fruit. She's gone someplace. And I don't want her to go someplace that I can't go also. I don't want to be alone again. I don't really like being alone. And maybe that had something to do with why he said, if I don't follow her, I may lose her. She may go where I cannot, so I need to follow here. And it's possible that the fear of loneliness allowed Adam to let Eve determine right and wrong. And when that happened, sin entered. And I wonder if really one of the root cause things that happened was Adam and Eve flipped the relationship with God. It should be God meets my needs, my spouse touches my needs, to now my spouse, I'm going to look to them to meet my needs, and God, I want him to touch my needs. I'll go to him when I need something, but I'm really looking to my spouse to come through for me because they're right here. Now, what a pressure to put on another human being. If that's what truly happened, and that relationship flipped, what kind of pressure is that? To all of a sudden have another person saying, you better come through for me. Sometimes I wonder if in a lot of marriages, each person walks down the aisle and the bride is looking at the husband saying, I am going to give you the opportunity to meet all of my needs for the rest of my life. And the groom is walking down the aisle looking at his bride saying, I'm going to give you the opportunity to meet all of my needs for the rest of my life. And then the first week of marriage hits and they go, wait a second, you're here to meet my needs. No, you're here to meet my needs. And then loneliness multiplied exponentially. Access to the garden is cut off. Access to walking with God in the cool of the day is cut off because they flipped that relationship. Sin entered. And now we have to work the ground, and it's hard. Now we have to work at a relationship with God. And now we have to work at relationships with each other. And even when we do the right things, sometimes it's hard to work at a relationship with another. Yesterday was Sweetest Day. I was on my game. Friday, I bought my wife a dozen roses. Had them there right centrally located, right on the table, and I thought, I'm going to touch her needs. She's going to see these flowers and say, he thinks of me. He loves me. He cares for me. And she came in, and I was all hopeful. I was sitting there going, yeah, this is all right. I'm on my game now. She said, oh, look at that. That vase is beautiful. Look at that. It matches the flowers. Oh, that vase is outstanding. Where did you get that? Flowers are, it's like roses, red roses. Your heart, love, Sweetest Day. That's what this is about. Man, but the vase is outstanding. I mentioned this to my 16-year-old daughter later. And I said, I can't believe it. Mom came in and she didn't even mention the flowers. It was all about the vase. And my daughter goes, Dad, that really is a nice vase. And I was just like, I can't win. Even when you try to touch another person's needs, sometimes it's hard work and it doesn't work as good as all of your efforts are. When sin entered, it's hard to carry on a good relationship with another. Now let's define the problem. I think that we can say one of the root causes is we flipped how things should go. We now think that our spouse or significant others should meet our needs, and God should just touch those needs. But let's define the problem of loneliness. How does it develop? I think loneliness really develops under stress. If we look at the life of Christ, there's a couple situations where you can see where loneliness and not wanting to be alone is quite important to Jesus. Do you know at the night before the cross, at the Last Supper, in Luke 22:15, Christ says, I have earnestly desired to eat the Passover with you. That was kind of interesting to me for Jesus to say, do you know what? I am really looking forward to this. Now, you all have things you really look forward to. Vacations. You look forward maybe to a promotion at work. You look forward to some family event. It's like, oh, I can't wait till this happens. You look forward to a camping trip. Here Jesus is saying, I am about to go to the cross. I am about to be abandoned by everybody. And I am really looking forward to one last time with all of my friends together. I really want this to happen because my heart is going to break. And when things are in a stressful situation, don't you want all of your friends to be with you? Don't you want the closest ones to be with you? Jesus knew what was ahead. Don't you want your family or your pastor to be there before you go into the hospital for a meaningful surgery? If someone dies in your family, someone that you really cared for, a parent, a child, don't you want family members, close friends to be there beside you? That's what Jesus felt here. He was both God and man and had the same type of feelings we do for companionship. I want the support of my friends. I'll tell you, one of the loneliest places I've ever seen people sit is in the very front row when I've done a funeral message. When I look at that front row, and especially at the graveside, the people who sit, they are some of the loneliest people I've ever seen. That's one of the hardest places to sit. Even with all of your friends around you, it's a lonely, lonely place. Also, Jesus in Gethsemane, another time where he was under great stress. Verses 36 through 40. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. Even in Gethsemane, Jesus wanted the closest ones when he knew this is what's coming. My crucifixion, my death is coming. I want the closest ones to me to be with me. He was going to die for our sin, to be separated from God. And in the end, what happened? All of his companions fled. Loneliness. So when you speak of loneliness and you pray about loneliness, and when you say, "My heart is breaking, Lord, I'm so lonely." I don't have any friends. Jesus can say, "I understand how you feel because all of mine ran away." Your words are not falling on the ears of someone whose heart has not felt this pain. Probably the worst is when God himself turned away from Christ as Christ bore our sin in Matthew 27. In Matthew 27, 45 to 46, it says, "From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, 'Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani,' which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It was at that time Jesus bore our sin, and it was so ugly, even God, the God the Father, with whom he had perfect fellowship throughout all eternity, had to turn his back on him. Loneliness. Top 5 stress situations shown by psychologists say that these 5 things cause the greatest amounts of stress and loneliness in a person's life. Death of a loved one, divorce, moving, just moving to another location because you're uprooting all of your relationships, a major illness, or a job loss. Now, is being alone bad? Not at all. I love to be alone. Jesus, in Luke 4:42, it says he retired to a lonely place to pray after he had spent an entire day healing the sick and ministering to people. He said, I've got to get away from it. I need a time to rest. I need a time by myself. And then just a few verses away in Luke 5:16, it talks about again, he retreats to a lonely place to pray in which he can look to God, the one who will meet his needs. Loneliness also develops under failure, when we feel like we have failed. In Luke 22:60-62, Peter went through a horrible failure. This is where he denied Christ 3 times. And in this moment, Luke records that Jesus actually looked at him at the very moment that the rooster crowed. Peter replied, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, what the word of the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Lonely. A lonely place when you fail. Sometimes it's horrible when you think you fail. Now Hannah Doll is here somewhere. Do you know, Hannah, you are named after one of my favorite women in the Old Testament. I think one of the strongest women in the Old Testament. This woman was made to feel like a failure. This woman was made to feel like dirt. She was married to a man by the name of Elkanah. Elkanah had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah bore him children. Hannah was barren. But he loved Hannah. He would give a double portion of everything to Hannah. Peninnah saw this, and Peninnah was jealous. Peninnah just rubbed it into Hannah. She did things to make Hannah feel horrible. It got to the point at times where Peninnah would say, well, you know, I have children, you don't. You're worthless. That Hannah ended up feeling like a failure. She was told she was a failure, although she wasn't. She couldn't control this. But she felt horrible. And one time when she was refusing to eat, this is in 1 Samuel chapter 1, when she was refusing to eat and weeping, her husband Elkanah came to her and said one of the 2 most ridiculous things ever said in the Bible. The first most ridiculous was Aaron, when Moses said, "Where did this golden calf come from?" And Aaron says, "I just took this gold and threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." The second most ridiculous thing that was ever said is what Elkanah said to his wife. She's sitting there weeping and crying. Her heart is broken. And he's saying, "What's the matter with you? Don't you see that I love you? Am I not worth 10 sons to you?" And I'm sitting there going, man, she should be looking up out of the Bible right there and saying, see what I've got? See what I deal with here? This man just totally misses me. I am dying, and he thinks that he should be the answer to all of my pain. He can't answer that. See, that's the problem. Elkanah thought that he could meet her needs. He was making the same mistake that Adam and Eve made, that Adam made, saying, I want my spouse to meet my needs. Hannah was lonely. She wanted a child. Hannah was made to feel like an absolute failure, and it put her in a lonely place. And I think there are people here that have people that make you feel horrible too. Almost everybody here has had a Peninnah at some time in their life. A Peninnah that says, "You're worthless. I'm sorry, you can't do this. You're a failure." Maybe it's somebody at work. Maybe it's somebody in your family. Maybe it's somebody that you loosely consider a friend that makes you feel horrible. But one of the things that Hannah did that I love, she flipped the problem that Adam set in motion. She said, "No, Elkanah you cannot meet my needs. Only God can do that. And then she went and prayed for a son and said to the Lord, I will dedicate him to you. If you give me my heart's desire, Lord, I will give it right back. And when I think of that, I say, the strength of that woman to say, the very thing I want, God, if you give it to me, I offer it right back to you, which is what she did when she had Samuel. She said, I will take him. He will minister with Eli at the tabernacle. And then she would have to travel to see her son. That's why I think she's one of the strongest women in the Bible. She knew how to take care of that basic sin problem, but a lonely, lonely woman who was made to feel like a failure. Loneliness also develops under negativity and hopelessness. Do you remember the story of Elijah in 1 Kings 18? It's one of the most colorful stories in the Bible where Elijah kills the 400 prophets of Baal. You know, he sits there, they try to call down fire from heaven. All day long, he's sitting there saying, oh, yell louder. Maybe Baal is asleep. Maybe he's resting someplace. And then when Elijah calls down fire, he says, okay, dump all this water, dig a trench around here, dump all the water on, I want you to know that there's no hidden fire in here. And then God consumes the very stones. And then after he does that, Jezebel says, you killed all of my prophets of Baal, all of my priests. Elijah, I'm coming after you to kill you. Elijah feels like he's the only one left. He is a man alone. And as Clint Eastwood said in one of my favorite westerns, Pale Rider, a man alone is easy prey. He ran. He ran. He was exhausted. He laid down and said, Lord, take my life. I alone am left. Just take my life in 1 Kings 19:3. Do you know fatigue plus hunger plus loneliness actually made Elijah become suicidal in his thinking? Loneliness can do some horrible things to the human soul. And there are things that some people here would say, no, I would never say publicly to anybody that, I've thought of taking my own life. I've been so lonely. But I would say that if we were all very honest, there would be times when we've all said, Lord, I'm done. I'm like Elijah. I give up. Take my life. I'm done. I can't handle it. It's too much. Another situation where there was just absolute negativity and hopelessness. In Genesis 19:30, Lot's two daughters. Do you know what happens when you have negativity and loneliness and hopelessness in your life? You start to make huge compromises, sometimes moral compromises. Do you remember after Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, Lot escaped with his two daughters, went up and lived in a cave. His daughters just got lonely and said, we don't have anybody to date. We're never going to have kids. We're going to die up here in this cave with our dad. Then they decided to get him drunk, had an incestuous relationship with him, both daughters, and that's how Ammon and Moab came to be. The nations that after that just caused great pain for Israel and Judah. Loneliness can lead one to compromise their sexual purity. And don't judge Lot's daughters too harshly. Remember, Lot was the father who said when the angels visited and the men of Sodom and Gomorrah wanted to rape the angels, Lot said, no, I have two virgin daughters here. Let me send them out and you can gang rape them. So I don't look at Lot as, he wasn't much of a role model for his girls. When most of us that are fathers would sit there and say with our daughters, I would die to defend them, rather than Lot, who would say, if it keeps me safe, I'll just throw them out. Loneliness also develops under discouragement. And discouragement hits everyone in the church. It hit the Apostle Paul. At the end of his life in 2 Timothy, he was an old man. He wasn't in a house prison anymore. By the time he was in prison at that time, he was in stocks. He was chained up like a common criminal. Even his friends had a hard time finding him. And everybody, he said, had deserted him. A lonely man. And I wonder if the older you get, the more painful the feelings of loneliness become. When you're younger and you move around so much and you're mobile, maybe one doesn't feel lonely quite as bad as somebody who once they're aged and there's just not that many places to go and you sit at home. It's harder. But here's Paul chained like a common criminal. And in 2 Timothy 1:15, he says, everyone in Asia has deserted me. Everyone's deserted me. Phygellus and Hermogenes, they were my fellow workers. They've gone. In 2 Timothy 4:9, he says, Timothy, come quickly. Come quickly to me. Do your best to come quickly. At 4:16, he talks about his defense. As he was brought to court, at my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. Absolutely alone. When a person is discouraged, loneliness can come in. And when loneliness comes in, you start to say, I've got to trust in something else. I've got to trust in people. I need people there, but God is saying, I believe, no, let me meet your needs, and I can send people to touch your needs. Luke was there to touch his needs. But the natural end after discouragement like that is bitterness and despair. And it was only by the Holy Spirit's power that he was able to say in verse 17, but the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. And even in the end of verse 16 where he says, may it not be held against them that everyone deserted me. The corrective action to loneliness is really to rely on God to meet your needs. It's to go back to how things were in the Garden of Eden. Instead of saying, I want other people to meet my needs and God to be my helper, it needs to be God needs to meet my needs and other people are there to be helpers. They're there to touch my needs. But sinful people will fail. Sinful people will not come through. And when it comes down to it, the root cause analysis is just like I have many times with problems where I work. The problem comes from not following the procedure. And the procedure that God set up in the garden was, I will meet your needs. I will determine right and wrong, the parameters in which you shall live, your morality, and I give you another person, friends, family, for some a spouse, to touch your needs. Stress, failure, negativity, and hopelessness, discouragement, they bring loneliness. And if we look to other people to make the loneliness go away, we will only be disappointed. If we hope that we can have a friend or a parent or a child or a spouse take that away, it won't happen. That's something only God can do. And loneliness is unavoidable. If it was there in the garden before sin entered, I think we can say that it's going to touch some of us, almost all of us at some time. No other human can meet our needs, and it's great pressure we put on other people to meet our needs. Only God can do that. I'm wondering if, even before the fall, loneliness was a pain that was set there to drive a man to God. Physical pain was there. I think if Adam and Eve were eating strawberries and accidentally one of them bit their lip, it would have hurt. And they would have said, well, I'm going to have to be more careful when I eat these. They taste so good, I'm going to have to slow down. I think loneliness may have been there in the garden to say, it's time to be with God because there is an ache in my heart. And maybe when loneliness hits, that's exactly what it's saying to me. That's what it's saying to you. There needs to be time spent alone with God. And some people say, well, I tried praying. For 5 minutes. I was there, and I got up, and I felt like I was just wasting my time. Maybe it means that you've got to stay at it until you feel that God has come through, that you've connected. Maybe it's a commitment you need to make to say, I may have to be on my knees for 20 minutes. If that's what it takes to feel like I've connected with the Lord, that's what I do. If I have to be there for a half an hour, then that's what I do. If I have to be there for 45 minutes or an hour, that's what I do because something is wrong in my heart. And only a relationship with the living God can draw off the pain. I'd like to try to illustrate what we try to do with each other when it comes to pain. Let's say this bottle is a person, and the colored water in there is the pain they feel. Why do you suppose it's blue water? The blue water, sadness, blues. Oh, you guys are a sharp crowd. Sometimes a spouse will say, I hurt so bad. I need my spouse. I need a friend to be able to touch the pain. You know, your spouse may want to try, but sometimes to get down there and touch that pain, that's the spouse with a little bucket to try and sample that pain to understand it. Sometimes that pain is down there so low. As much as that person can try, they just can't reach it. And if you sit there and get angry at that person in your life, even though they're trying, they're sitting, it's hurting, they're trying to get down to it. They want to try and touch your needs. They can't. Sometimes we get mad at that person. What's the matter with you? Don't you understand me? Maybe you're asking them to do something that only God can do. Maybe some of us are fortunate enough to have a friend, someone in our life, where the string is long enough that it can get down there and touch. But even when it touches, do you know what it does? It can't get all the way to the bottom, but at least it's touching the pain. That's what we're supposed to try to do with each other as spouses. That's what we're supposed to do as friends with each other, to touch each other's pain. And maybe you can bring up, to understand that person, just a couple drops of their pain, so that you can say, yes, I see this. I taste this. I understand. But that's just, all I did was taste a couple drops. I can't get in there and take that away. Sometimes we think that the people the closest people in our lives, why aren't you taking it away? You're supposed to get rid of this. They can't. That's God's responsibility. God can come in and siphon that off, because only He has the ability to go in there, down to the bottom, all the way, and to start a process by which that can be drawn off. And now, that pain has some place to go. And God can drain that pain. Sometimes it takes a while. But I think that's what the whole process of prayer is forming a line between you and God that allows Him to pull that out. So when you pray and when you say, I'm not going to get off my knees until I connect with the God, put this image in your mind. I want God to put a siphon within me, deep down into the darkest parts of my loneliness, and draw that out. Let's close in prayer. Father, it is sinful when we look at another human being and expect them to reach down inside our soul and draw out the pain that really only you can reach. It's proud for somebody to think that they can do it on their own. Forgive us of the times when we've looked at close friends, a parent or a spouse, and said, why can't you come through for me? They can't. They were sent as helpers, somebody to touch our needs, not meet our needs. Because it's only through a relationship with God, through Jesus Christ, that God can touch the deepest needs of our heart and can address loneliness. So, Father, if there's a reservoir of loneliness that's welling in our soul, what needs to be done? It needs to be brought before Jesus Christ. And it's in His name we pray.